So ritual becomes that means by which we are able to enter into a space of transparency. We get to be seen. And part of the beauty of our grief ritual gatherings was that we began on Friday almost totally as strangers, right? But by the time we get to Sunday, there's this raucous feeling of village life. And it's beautiful. And it's not based on having shared my whole personal story with you. But what I got to see was how you are in the face of ritual and the willingness to be seen, witnessed in the depth of your own human encounter. That's what makes us known to another human being. So part of the value of ritual is that it helps us to come back into a place of really being known deeply. And again, that can be scary for folks.
Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
We welcome all of you, so many from the Commonweal community, so many from the Francis Wellers community, so many other friends. We're just delighted to have you here. 50 years ago, I looked out at this site from Poplar Road in the town of Bolinas and was given a vision of a center for healing ourselves and healing the earth. And 50 years later, we're still here. Under Oren's leadership, it has grown to 30 programs around the world, working in health and healing, education, the arts, environment, and sustainability and resilience. For 40 of those years, the Commonweal Cancer Health Program has been at the heart of Commonweal's work. We've done, as of this month, 230 week-long retreats for people with cancer and their loved ones. These are people getting the best available conventional care, but they know they need more for the care of their souls. They know they need to tend their grief. They know they need to find inner wholeness again. Francis Weller has co-led these retreats with me for the past 13 years. And in his exquisite new book from North Atlantic Books, and we're so proud North Atlantic Books is with us today, he speaks of Commonweal as his other family. You called this deeply considered book, In the Absence of the Ordinary, Soul Work for Times of Uncertainty. Anderson, you speak publicly of your deep apprenticeship to grief in your own personal life, and you've made grief and loss central to your own work. The fact that you and Francis, who is one of the truly great teachers of grief work and soul work of our time, have found each other and come together and have honored us by coming together to do this here at Commonweal is a profound blessing for all of us. So we're honored, we're grateful, and bless this sacred work that you are both involved with. Thank you very much.
Hello there. My name is Tim McKee, and I feel so honored to introduce Anderson and Francis today. I'm also proud, as the publisher of North Atlantic Books, to have published Francis's 3 books, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, In the Absence of Ordinary, which just came out, and in the spring, the workbook to The Wild Edge of Sorrow, which is called Entering the Healing Ground. A little bit about North Atlantic Books. We're a nonprofit publisher based in the Bay Area. We have been publishing books for over 50 years. And we publish at the intersection of healing and justice. The Wild Edge of Sorrow has sold over 250,000 copies. In the book publishing world, that is a huge feat. Francis, through his words, through his teaching, through his rituals, through his practice, and Anderson, I'm so moved that you as a public figure have shared so honestly and rawly about your own private grief. Not many public people do that, and it's a big deal, and I appreciate it. I want to share something to finish off that Anderson said in one of their conversations that I think is really apt for today. Anderson, you told Francis, I don't want to keep this sadness, this grief buried any longer. I can't. In trying to bury my own sadness, I've buried my ability to feel joy. I don't want to live half a life any longer. I want to feel all there is. With that, please join me in welcoming Francis and Anderson.
Well, that about wraps it up. I feel satisfied. How about you?
I like that the tissues are positioned by me, not by him, by the way. Sensible, I can guarantee you. It's very sensible.
What a joy. I mean, speaking of joy, what a joy to sit here with this beautiful collective of souls and hearts and people committed to tending the soul of the world. So I'm so grateful just to have the chance to sit and be with you all and to see what arises between the two of us. That's only a piece of the equation, isn't it? It's also what arises with you. You know, as Tim said very beautifully, there's no way on earth we can face what is happening alone. No way on earth can any one of us lift the weight of what is happening in our world, in our communities, in our families, in our own bodies. But collectively, communally, that's the only thing that I feel has the possibility of being able to uplift where we are right now. I remember being in a continuing education class some years ago with Rick Hansen. Some of you may know Rick Hansen's work. He's a neuropsychologist who wrote Buddha's Brain and a few other books. And he's teaching us these wonderful interior practices to how to titrate grief and trauma and the difficult material that human beings have to digest. And as I'm listening to him, I'm realizing these are wonderful, but the original matrix was communal. For hundreds of thousands of years, when there was trauma, when there was death, when there was trouble, we gathered together. And we did the rituals, we did the songs, we told the stories. We were able to witness one another in the midst of the trouble and be held in that containment field. The solitary confinement we've been sentenced to in Western, particularly white Western society, is a death knell for the planet. So this is an act of resistance to gather and talk about and share and respond to one another's sorrows, to hear what is moving in our hearts right now. So I could just keep going on, but I'm going to stop right there and welcome you. I'm so glad we made this connection.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
And where it's taken us over the years.
Yeah.
So
I'll just tell you a little bit about what brought me here. And to Francis, I had started going through the things that my mom had left behind. My mom died in 2019, and at the age of 95, she lived an extraordinary life. And I began going through the boxes of things, as we all probably have in our lives, of those we love. It turned out to be boxes of things that also belonged to my brother, who died by suicide when he was 23 and I was 21. He killed himself in front of my mom, and she could never bring herself to go through his things, so she'd had them boxed up. And it turned out also to be the boxes of things my dad had left behind. He died when I was 10, at the age of 50, and my mom had never been able to go through those things. And as the last one left from the little family I grew up in, it was up to me. And I found the experience just so overwhelming and sad and lonely. And I thought, this is odd that this is this experience which everybody has gone through or will have to go through at some point in their lives. And yet it's not something I've heard a lot of people talk about. Certainly no one in my life really gave me a heads up about this process. And also my mom had a shitload of stuff, as you might imagine, that she had just stored away in a storage unit. So as I was going through this, I started recording stuff. I read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and he talks about narrating events in the camps that it allowed him to kind of go through menial tasks without losing his mind. And I started doing that, and I turned it into a podcast. And the response to it was so overwhelming. I did about 8 episodes. I stopped. I found myself unable to just deal with suddenly people coming up to me on the street and talking about the most deepest moving moments of their life. And it was beautiful. But as somebody who had suppressed my emotions most of my life. It was a bit of a shock. And I had asked people, I had set up a voicemail message for people to call the end of the podcast if there was something they'd learned in their grief that would be helpful for others. And in the last episode, I used some of those, but I'd only listened to about 200 messages. There were 1,000 messages left. And I felt, even though I wasn't going to do the podcast, I felt, well, I've asked for people to leave messages, and so many have. I have to listen to all these messages. So it took me months. I listened to 46 hours of just extraordinary, life-alteringly profound messages. And I found myself weeping in ways that I never had before, and it at least motivated me not to do the podcast, but to go downstairs and start going through the boxes again, which I had stopped doing. There were about 100 boxes in my basement. The first box I went to, I opened it up, and it turned out to be a box of my dad's papers. He was a writer. And I opened up the first file I opened up in this box that I had picked randomly. There was pages in it. I turned it over. It turned to be an essay he'd written called The Importance of Grieving. And in it, he writes about my brother and I, and he wrote it about 2 years before he died, and he knew he was going to die. His dad had died at 50. And I realized as he was writing it that it was really a letter to my brother and I. Anyway, in it, he quotes a psychologist, I think a guy named Robert Furman, who talked about what happens to children who don't grieve, and that they often will go through their life with a melancholy that they can never quite put their finger on, the source of it. And I realized in that moment that I had never grieved, that I was this child that this doctor was talking about. That's exactly what I had done when my dad died at 10, and then when my brother died 10 years later. And it just stunned me. And around the same time, having done this podcast, I'd been sent like hundreds of grief books. There's a lot of grief books out there. There's a lot of self-published grief books as well, which I've received a lot of. And that was also overwhelming. I had them all on my desk at work, and somebody had sent me Frances's book, a woman named Cynthia who had lost a child. And for whatever reason, I had kept it on my desk. I just hadn't read it. And around this time, I picked it up and I read it. And my favorite movie is Heart of Darkness, and there's a line is Apocalypse Now, based on Heart of Darkness. And there's a line Marlon Brando talks about being shot with the diamond bullet. And I feel like when I read Frances's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, it stunned me. It fundamentally altered my understanding of grief, the way I thought about grief. And I just want to read like the two lines that particularly struck me when I first opened this up. He wrote, "Beyond the crazed hunger in our culture to be exceptional, loss and sorrow wear away whatever mass we attempt to present to the world. Like the massive stone carvings in the jungles of Central America that now lie broken on the forest floor, the monuments we erect to our own importance collapse. We're stripped of excess and revealed as human in our times of grief. Grief ripens us, pulls up from the depths of our souls what is most authentic in our beings." And I decided to start doing the podcast again. I asked Frances to be a guest on it. We did an interview in which my voice was so shaky, like it is right now, and I was crying so much, I actually had to redo the entire interview about 6 months later. I went to Israel on October 7th, was there for 3 weeks. I came back and we re-recorded the entire thing because it was pretty much unusable because I could not get through this. I was so moved and I was reeling because I really did not know what to do with this sudden realization that I'd never grieved before. And after the interview was done and it went out, I sent Frances an email and I said, I've never written an email like this to anybody and I've never actually spoken these words, but I need help. And he very kindly responded. And so we've been in dialogue ever since, and it's been life-changing. So I'm really grateful to be here. And I'm a huge admirer. And yeah, so I just want to start with, we're going to be talking about the wild edge of sorrow and also in the absence of the ordinary. But you write in The Wild Edge of Sorrow, "For the most part, grief is not a problem to be solved, not a condition to be medicated, but a deep encounter with an essential experience of being human. And you talk a lot about developing an apprenticeship with sorrow, a companionship with grief. And you talk about revisioning grief. And those ideas were kind of revolutionary to me. And so could you just talk, what is how do you develop a companionship with sorrow, an apprenticeship with grief?
I don't know.
Thank you very much, everybody. Did you actually write this?
Yeah. It was actually AI. It's,
Oh, Claude.
the idea of the apprenticeship came, when you sit with people for 40-some years in your practice, you realize that no one in that room is lacking in sorrow. No matter what the reason they come in the door, whether it's childhood abuse or abandonment or loss of a marriage or the death of someone they love, the commons of the soul reveal themselves in that room. And the commons is sorrow, is loss. Now, how many of you in this room got any education on how to be with sorrow and loss? One person. Okay, thank you.
What school did you go to?
Joanna Macy, yes. Oh, dear Joanna, bless her. So I began to think about, well, how do we walk with this? And how do we let it free from the prison cell of singular events? Like, I don't know about you, but I touch sorrow every single day, right? I mean, whether it's roadkill, whether it's just taking the risk of turning on the TV or the computer, everything is saturated. We live in an ambient field right now that is so dense with sorrow and fear and anxiety. And if we don't know how to turn into that, we have to shut down from it. And that's probably a primary symptom of this culture right now is numbness. I talk about the two primary sins of this society are amnesia and anesthesia. We have forgotten how to be human beings with one another. We have forgotten the rituals and the practices that actually help us hold this life together. And consequently, because of the amnesia, we have to go into anesthesia. We can't stay open to the world if what we're feeling is so crushing to our hearts on any given day. So this idea of the apprenticeship came to me. It's like, this is a long-term study. Just like the old apprenticeships where there was carpentry or weaving or stonework or whatever it was. You didn't do a weekend workshop and call yourself a master craftsperson, right? You studied for years and years, sometimes 5, 10, 15 years before you earned the right to be called a master. But think about how we begin the apprenticeship. It's with great humility. If you wanted to be a painter, you didn't start by painting. You started by cleaning the brushes. You started by mixing the paint. You started by stretching the canvas. You didn't touch the brush to the canvas until much later. So the apprenticeship requires a certain discipline, a certain fidelity to stay true to the learning. So in that old tradition, the apprenticeship would lead to mastery. In the work with soul, in the apprenticeship with sorrow, it doesn't lead to mastery, it leads to elderhood. And this is another one of those absences in our collective right now, isn't it? There are very few true adults, very few true elders walking the streets and helping us to materialize and metabolize what's in our streets right now, which is a lot of fear. And the young ones feel it, and they often feel completely abandoned by us. So that apprenticeship is, again, not for me. It helps steady me. It helps me be able to turn toward my grief and stay in touch with it and work it. But again, it's not for me in the ultimate.
The idea, though, for me of a companionship with grief, I mean, this was something that I have always felt was so overwhelming and so potentially destructive that to even acknowledge it or turn to it would be cataclysmic. Or I mean, I started working in news I couldn't get an entry-level job in news, so I made a fake press pass and I started going to wars by myself. And I wanted to touch human suffering, and I wanted to get as close to the line between life and death as possible. And for the first 3 years, I was working all by like solo and maybe with one or two producers, in Somalia and Rwanda, in the genocide, in South Africa and Sarajevo and all these places. But I couldn't feel my own sadness, but I could get close to others and I could feel. It was the only time I could feel. Yeah. But I worried in the companionship with sorrow that it would just be, it would destroy me.
It would. If you do it in that old mentality, right? In the old strategy of how do I survive this grief? The I cannot. The we has a possibility. Again, going back to the original Matrix, I mean, my whole adult life has been designed to try to reanimate the original Matrix, which was communal. That's the only thing capable of catching us when something tragic happens, when something overwhelming. But the boy who's learned that strategy of tough and endurance, there's no way in hell he can face what you've had to face. The man can, with community.
Well, you talk about that in terms of developing an apprenticeship with sorrow. You talk about learning to hold grief or turn to it kind of softly and hold it warmly.
Yeah.
But also you talk about that it has to be done in the hands of an adult, not in the hands of the child.
Yes.
Because for me, when I think of grief and when I feel it, I am 10 years old, I'm 9 years old, whatever
Yes.
it is. And it is the child, it is like the hard-hearted heart of a child. It's the outrage of a child.
But now you know that. Before knowing it, you just simply became that. Mm. When the grief would come up, you would become the 10-year-old boy. And who as 10 years old has the resource, internally or relationally, to hold that level of loss?
I was a pretty tough 10-year-old.
I believe that. Still are,
Very true.
Yeah. You're working that one.
Oh, yeah. It takes a lot of work. Maybe I'm 11 now. But you say grief is more than an emotion. It's also a core faculty of being human. It's a skill that must be developed.
Yes. Again, think about your encounter with grief. Without the skill, what we end up doing is trying to find out patterns of endurance. But grief doesn't want to be endured. It wants to not just be, how do I get through to the other side? It also wants to drop us. It wants to deepen us. And if we hold true to the grief's requests, we are deepened. We are ripened. But again, only the adult can do that. The boy has no fantasy, no fiction that would allow him to feel like there's a pathway through this. So until you make that separation, which we've talked a lot about, until you now know that there's a 10-year-old who, when you get touched by sorrow, he's frequently in the room. Mm. Now that you know that, you have this ability to turn toward it.
It's remarkable to me that as a society, we have moved from a society where grief was communal, wherein, you look at prints from the 1800s and there are children at the deathbed of family members gathered around. People's bodies were displayed in the living room. John Jacob Astor, when he died, the entire neighborhood, he was an asshole, but the entire neighborhood was invited to view his body in his son's home. People put up black bunting. People didn't die in hospitals. But as grief became privatized in America in the 20s and the 30s and 40s, it's amazing to me that we've now developed a system where this universal thing that we all carry and that we all will face in our lives and we will all struggle with, it is not to be talked about.
Right.
And it used to be sex wasn't talked about, but grief was talked about. It's become completely inverted. Talking about sex all the time, but grief is the big taboo. It's insane to me that as a society, we have allowed that to happen, and everyone's walking around like Stephen Colbert, who I interviewed for the podcast. His father and two of his twin brothers were killed in an Eastern Airlines plane crash when he was 10 years old. And he's like, I can't believe everybody's not asking me about Peter and Paul every day. It's in his mind every day. The people I've lost are in my head every day. It's all I think about. And it's been 50 years. But the fact that we're not expected to talk about it, or it just makes people uncomfortable is so weird to me.
That's true. No, I often say if we were a sane society, there'd be grief work happening in every community, at least once or twice a month. But we have people who have traveled from Australia, from England, from Canada, from all across the United States to join us for our grief rituals. And I often say to them, first of all, isn't it strange we did a workshop on grief? Because then there again, that's part of the amnesia, what we have forgotten, that we actually have to go to a workshop to remember how to grieve. But the second thing that's actually more at the heart of it is that because we have abandoned these practices, you have to travel 8,000 miles for the privilege of being able to grieve next to another human being. Now that's at the heart of our sorrow, is how much we have forgotten. So you're talking about this gradual but persistent erosion in what it is the society, a culture needs. And this is one of the most basic needs, isn't it? How do we escort our families, our friends, through times of great loss?
I've since started this podcast again and continued to do this voicemail, and we've received now 7,000 to 8,000 messages. I've listened to about 6,500 of them. And they were the most deep, it's the most extraordinary thing I've ever done in my life. And, to be listening in AirPods to, the names of people's loved ones. There's some people in this room who are people who have called into that voicemail, whose messages I know and who I've been in contact with. And there's just an ocean of grief out there. Yes. There's an ocean of unrecognized grief, I hate the word process, but unprocessed grief of people who are carrying this and don't know what to do with it.
There is a signal frequency in the psyche that's waiting to hear or receive the frequency back that it's time to let it down. In other words, if this evolutionary story that I'm talking about is true, that we evolved with a certain cadence and rhythm that recognizes the frequency of being in ritual space together. And when that frequency is ceased, and in other words, the call and response is no longer activated, we're left having to hold both sides of the coin. Now I'm being asked to both contain and release, and I physically can't do that. So I end up becoming a permanent containment field for grief, like you have been. You've been just recycling this grief. And it's also, as I sit with it more over time, it's not just mine, is it? Most of the grief we carry is not personal. It's collective, it's ancestral. It comes to us. So much of it is not even current, it's historical. Anybody here ever been to therapy?
Let's make it easier. Anyone here not been to therapy?
Good point. But what do we do in therapy? We turn and try to find the bones of the past that haven't been fully held and tended. And that's what we do. And without processing the grief, those things will not move.
Well, also, to me, what I've come to see so much, and now that I have little children, I have a 5-year-old and a 3.5-year-old, very insistent he's 3.5 and not 3, the cycles that repeat through the generations of pain and,
yes,
the things, like my mom had a sadness behind her eyes that I always saw from the time I was a little kid, and I didn't know what it was for a long time until she later in life started talking about what had happened to her as a child, and then I came to understand that sadness. And I looked in the mirror one day about 20 years ago, and I realized I had that same sadness behind my eyes. Yeah. And now that I have kids, I don't want them to see a sadness behind my eyes. And so that's been, but this idea of this sort of the cycles of history that repeat in families it's just extraordinary to me to see the face of my mom and my brother in my little son's face. Is just.
Well, I think the difference there, Anderson, is I hope they see sadness in your eyes, but I hope they also see a man responding to that sadness. So your mother didn't know how to respond to that sadness. So it became a persistent identity rather than something she was encountering and working with. And that's the thing I want them to see, is that you as a man, as an adult man, have chosen to engage it
You called your apprenticeship with sorrow. You called it My Gateway Back into the Breathing and Animate World.
Yes.
It was through the dark waters of grief you wrote that I came to touch my unlived life.
Yes. Yeah, I remember going to my first grief ritual back in the mid-'90s. Remember the mid-'90s? Long time ago.
I had brown hair in the mid-'90s. Yeah.
I had hair
sort
in the
of a flock of
mid-'90s.
seagulls swoop.
But I remember standing there and unable to touch my grief. I was watching people crying in front of me, and I just couldn't touch it. And I went to the second one. Same thing happened. Finally, on the third one, I knew I had this bucket of sorrow in me. And finally, someone just reached over and touched my shoulder, and I was gone for hours on the ground. That was that signal frequency I was talking about. Until that frequency is registered in the psyche, we're not going to move through the material. We're not going to move into the material. It's actually wise not to move into the material. You get what I'm saying? The psyche knows what it is we require in order to move the grief. And until that condition is met, it's just recycling. We're just chewing the same bones over and over and over.
How many people here have actually done a grief ritual? Wow.
Woo.
I haven't, so. I'm still kind of like, I know it's a good thing and I know it would be great, but I don't know. I sort of like to push all those emotions.
Well, isn't self-control one of the edifices of that strategy?
Yes,
right?
Of course, yeah.
Maintain control.
Yeah.
I remember in one of our podcasts, you said, I can't get through a day without crying a lot. And I said, is this the problem?
At the time, it seemed a big problem to me.
And now?
No, it just, it comes up and it bubbles up in weird times. And so that's, you also said on the podcast, those tears are holy. And I believe that. And I'm grateful for them, but it still it goes against everything I have been telling myself.
He has. Everything the boy has been telling himself. Again, that's part of the separation. Does that make sense what I'm talking about when I use the language of separation? There's an idea of Carl Jung's. He said we can't heal what we can't separate from. So most of the times, our grief is being held by a very young part of us.
Well, this for me has been a huge revelation in talking to Francis, and which is that, at a very young age, I shut down, and just as my dad wrote about in that essay, and didn't allow myself to feel. I buried it down. My brother did the same. We went to our separate corners. We never talked. C.S. Lewis writes in Grief Remembered, he talks about trying to talk about his wife to his stepsons about their mother, and they look at him and just want him to shut up and stop talking because they can't listen to it. Later on, one of the stepsons wrote the foreword to the book and said, actually, as brilliant as my stepfather was, he misunderstood. We wanted to talk about our mother. We just could not say the words because we would have exploded in tears, and that's not what little boys did. Right. I shut down, and with each loss, just buried that deeper and deeper and deeper, and just ran from it my entire life.
And it caught you.
Yeah, and so it's interesting to me that the voice I developed in my head, the voice I have in my head, that is my inner monologue, is this monologue which is telling me which is protecting that little boy, which is be wary, don't trust anybody, protect yourself, and that's the voice I've listened to my entire life. And it served me well for a long time. It propelled me into the world. It's allowed me to work relentlessly, nonstop, but it's no longer serving me very well.
Right. And those are one of those strange times of difficult grace when our strategies fail and we're forced to confront what it is the strategies have been trying to help us prevent, meeting. So you called me in the moment when those strategies were absolutely collapsing. And that is a strange grace, but it's what's freeing you up to be sitting in this chair right now.
You write in the new book about The long dark.
Yes.
What is that?
Well, the long dark is where we are. We are in this, as Michael was saying, we're in this profound period of descent. We are going down.
One phrase you used in the book, you say, the ambient field surrounding us now is humming with fear, sorrow, anxiety, and a generous helping of dread.
Yes. Other than that, it's all good. It's all good.
We're in a nice spot.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, the long dark, both of those words are important. It's long. In other words, we're talking about at least 2 generations. Just looking out at the field here, most likely, very few of us are going to see the end of the long dark. That doesn't mean we don't have work to do now. I mean, our job now is to plant copious amounts of seeds that living culture might germinate out of our watered tears, out of our fertile ground, out of our deep work. That's our job to do right now. So it's long, generations long. There was a book that came out 2 or 3 years ago now called Choosing Earth by Dwayne Elgin. And I wrote the preface for that book. And he was insistent that I write the preface for this book. I did not want to write the preface for this book because it meant I had to read the book, which meant I had to confront my own denial about the world. Because what Dwayne does in this book is he lays out the next 5 decades. And from all of his 50 plus years of research, he lays out the probable encounters we're going to have in these decades. And my friends, it is scary. These decades are going to be filled. That's why one of the things I wrote in that preface was that grief will be the keynote for the foreseeable future. So again, if we don't know how to take up that apprenticeship, we're screwed. Not just personally, but collectively.
You also say we're in a rough initiation.
Yeah, let me finish the dark.
Okay.
Always trying to bypass the dark.
Can we move through the long dark? Let's move toward the light. It sounds like. Okay. We'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah. So the dark part of it is that, again, where we're being taken, I don't know the exact time frame, but let's say we've been on a 2,000 to 3,000 or 4,000 years of ascension. We love ascension. We love things going up. We like the stock market's going up. I won't go into that, but we love things going up. We don't like it when they start to go down. And this is precisely where we are right now. This is not a time of confidence or ease or rising. We're in a steep descent. I had thought the descent would be a little bit more gentle. I thought thered be a slope, but it seems like we're more in a precipice. We're more in a free fall. The collapse is happening very fast, both in the ecological sense, but also in the cultural and collective sense. The collapse is happening very quickly. So the darkness is also a word I think we must reclaim as holy. In our bifurcated and our binary systems, light is good, dark is bad. Up is good, down is bad. Well, tell that to day and night. Tell that to your own heart, which is beating right now in utter darkness, hopefully. That the darkness is also the dwelling place of the sacred. And so as we go down into the darkness, we're being invited to let go of certain strategies of domination, control, superiority, will to some degree, and become more receptive to patience, to humility, to deep listening, to solitude, to become receptor sites for the dreaming earth. That's what I feel we're being called to do right now.
Receptor sites for the dreaming earth.
Yes. That the earth is, in many mythological systems, the earth is a giant dreaming being. And that when you look at any culture that has endured for what I call elder cultures that have been here for at least 10,000 up to 125,000 years. How did they do that? Well, partly they were doing that by attending to the dream of the earth. They heard the rituals that they needed to do. There's a wonderful term out of the Inuit tradition called kartsaluni. And kartsaluni translates sitting quietly together in the darkness, waiting expectantly for something creative to burst forth. These were the whalers. They couldn't go out hunting the whale until the whales gave them a song that they could then sing and go out and take a whale. It wasn't we need it, so we're going to take it. There was no mutuality. There was no reverence of approach. There was no sense of restraint, which is also one of the things we learn in the darkness, is how to practice restraint. I mean, this is not a culture of restraint. This is a culture of consumption. And then whatever we want, we go out and take it. We will grab it. We will possess it. Well, in the darkness, that's not the primary mode. We have to become very still. We have to sit together quietly in the darkness and see what arises, see what comes to us. Become receptor sites, as I say. That's our job. That's our spiritual obligation in this time in the world, is to hear the song that might return us to creating living culture. I have two dear friends in the back of the room, Zaya and Maurizio, who just put out an amazing movie called The Eternal Song. And how many of you have seen The Eternal Song? It is such an important film. It's a difficult film. They went to 12 cultures around the planet to interview them about the living consequences of colonization. Whoa. It was fierce. It was intense. It was hard. But what I left the building with when watching that the first time was that somehow these cultures never had their eternal song silenced. Whereas white culture basically forgot the song. And we're living in the consequences of that amnesia again. We have forgotten the eternal song. So what I trust and what I hope and what I'm pinning our future on to some degree is that we're also still designed to hear the song. You know, Carl Jung, that wonderful, amazing psychiatrist from Sweden or Switzerland, said that we carry what he called the unforgotten wisdom that resides at the core of the psyche. So when we do grief work, when we gather in ritual space, when we remember that cadence again, there are people in the room who will say something like, I've never done anything like that before in my life, but it felt oddly familiar. You know, what is that oddly familiar thing? Well, it's that frequency. That's that style of being together, that when we can remember that, there's a chance of repair.
It actually relates to this quote you used by Paul Shepard, the human biologist, who wrote, "The grief and sense of loss that we often attribute to a failure of our personality is actually a feeling of emptiness where a beautiful and strange otherness should have been encountered."
Yeah, let's repeat that because I think it's such an important quote. The grief and sense of loss that we often attribute to a failure in our personality. There's Western psychology right there. We try to attribute that to a failure in our personality is actually a feeling of emptiness where a beautiful and strange otherness should have been encountered. And what Shepard was trying to point our attention to is that when we stopped the conversation with the living world, this emptiness began to appear and this deep grief that we have lost this relationship of intimacy with the singing world. And consequently, again, we're all by ourselves. I think it was Thomas Berry said, we have become a solitary species speaking only to ourselves. We have forgotten the conversation.
It'll be okay, because now we have AI to speak to.
Yeah, isn't that part of the predicament, right? I mean, what Shepard's pointing at was the sensual, erotic relationship with the world, that we felt it, that we embraced it, that we inhaled it, that we tasted it. AI is taking us into further and further levels of abstraction and distancing from the actual sensual world.
You mentioned in The Absence of Sorrow that there was a dictionary being written for kids that had actually removed all these words like willow and acorn.
Yes.
And, wild things that they felt weren't as important anymore.
Yeah, it was amazing. The wonderful book by Robert McFarlane, thank you, called Landmarks. And in it, he starts listing off all these words he's gathered from Great Britain. Blinter, which is the way stars shimmer in a winter night. And purr, which is the movement of water when a cat's paw touches it. There's all these words that they've gathered over hundreds and hundreds of years. And then he says, but what I just recently learned, that in the junior dictionary, Oxford Junior Dictionary, the number of words that they're taking out, alder, aspen, birch, they're taking these words out of the dictionary as if they don't matter to a child's psyche, as if they don't really exist in a child's encounter.
When even more depressing, the words that they're putting in are like data center,
broadband, chat room. So they're putting in the technological digital world in place of the actual sensual world. And we don't even see that as a symptom of, again, a further exposition of the great forgetting. We are forgetting our place on this planet. Yeah.
And what is the impact of that?
Look around. The impact on that is that we have substituted this mad frenzy of accumulation, of consumption, of wealth. We have put all of our emphasis on what I call secondary satisfactions. Because the primary satisfactions are that intimacy with the world, with friendship, with singing, with ritual, all the things that we were shaped by over several 100,000 years. Those are the things that actually gave shape to psyche, to soul. And when you forget that, when you lose touch with that,
those are the commons of the soul.
That's the commons of the soul. And when you lose touch with that, you have to put all of your energy behind secondary satisfactions. I just read a recent statistic that was pretty shocking, that if right now we require 1.9 Earths a year to handle the consumption levels. However, if everybody on the planet was consuming at the level of the United States, we would need almost 5 Earths. And this is what we call normal. This is our right. Was it 1992, I think it was, the first Rio conference on climate change? And George Bush, the senior, was the president at the time. And they were trying to come up with this agreement about curtailing consumption and cutting back on how much we are using. And he said, the American way of life is non-negotiable. Like, we're entitled to this. Now, where does that entitlement arise from, other than this profound emptiness that Shepard's referring to? We are really struggling with, how do we address the emptiness in our psychic lives? And how do we begin to see that what we're doing is a consequence of that emptiness? Does that make sense? I mean, why are we the highest consuming culture on the planet? By far. Well, I think it's because we deal with this, or we're not dealing with this profound sense of emptiness that we all carry. We don't even know we carry it, but it's there. How many of you have ever felt empty in your life? Yeah. 2 of you, okay. The rest of you will catch up, I'm sure of it. Yeah.
The rough initiation.
Yes.
What is that? What does that mean?
And another term that's come to me sitting with people over many, many decades, you begin to see that the patterns that they're encountering are in some odd way very much like traditional initiation. Like working with the Cancer Help Program, usually on Monday night when we're having our first circle together, I'll bring up this idea of the rough initiation. No one goes out looking for cancer, right? Cancer finds you. And when it finds you, the very moment you're told that you have cancer, you've begun a rough initiation. Three things happen in all true initiations. The first one is there's a severance from the world that you once knew. So when that diagnosis comes, I'm no longer that healthy person who is assuming that I'm going to live till I'm 90. Suddenly I'm somebody uncertain about all futures. The second thing that happens in any true initiation is there's a profound alteration in your sense of identity. How many times we've heard in the cancer circles, I don't know who I am anymore. All my markers, all the bearings are gone. And the third thing that happens in any true initiation is that you can never go back to the life you once had. Now, in a genuine initiation, you don't want to go back. In a genuine contained initiation, what I call the contained encounter with death, you are broken open to a much wider, a much larger sense of identity. You begin to feel that interplay between songbird and you, that you are part turtle, part wind, part rose, part cloud, part moon. You are part of all that. In a rough initiation, I call that an uncontained encounter with death. All the same things happen, but there's no containment field. There are no elders, there's no rituals, there's no community, there's no sacred ground, there's no ancestors, there's nothing to return to. So you're losing your ground, you're losing your identity, and you know you can't go back, but then you become stuck. See, initiation dislodges you from the old ground and puts you in a state, I'm sure many of you have heard this, called the liminal state, right? The liminal is a dissolution state where things fall apart, decay, break down. And you hope then, by going through that, just like the butterfly has to, you come out the other end. In rough initiation, you get stuck in the liminal. In other words, you become liminoid. I've never returned. I've been broken open by this difficult traumatic event, but I've never returned. So part of the ritual work of community, like with soldiers coming back or anybody going through a traumatic event, is rituals of return. How do we bring them out of the liminoid so they can actually come back to this life and breathe it again fully? As Mary Oliver says, are you only taking a half a breath and calling it a life? That's the survival strategies of many of these traumatic. You went through your rough initiation as a 10-year-old boy. Frequently when there's either violations through sexual abuse or we're too young, these things are laid on our laps way too early without any skill or containment to process it. So we end up getting caught. So that 10-year-old boy's been present ever since, right? Until now. So the rough initiation shook your ground, changed your identity, and you have been trying not to go back to the same place. So we have to finish the initiation. We have to bring you through all the way to here, now. Is that making sense?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
What do you write? This is the deep work of initiation. It's meant to dislodge our old identity, the sediment of self that we affix to our sense of who we are. We're meant to be radically changed by these encounters. You say it's time to become immense.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, I'm working on it. What I mean by that, another cancer help program story. During the cancer help program, there are group work most every day of the week. And so in one of these circles, a woman was sharing, and she was in a pretty empty relationship, but she really, really wanted to go to the Grand Canyon in her lifetime. So she decided to take herself, and she went there, and she had this amazing experience. She said, I was standing there at the lip of the Grand Canyon, and I felt that I was part of this. Then she hung her head down and said, but then I came home and was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. And I said, wait. What happened to the woman standing on the lip of the Grand Canyon? She says, what do you mean? I said, that's how immense you have to be right now. You have to get your arms around everything. See, in our positivistic psychology and our approaches to things, get your arms around hope and on, holding a positive attitude and love. Those are beautiful things. But we also have to get our arms around fear, around grief, around death, around uncertainty. And so when we're really in the midst of a rough initiation, the invitation is for immensity. How big am I being asked to be? And when we tie this back into the long dark, this is exactly where we are as a collective. How immense can we become in order to respond to what is moving in the field right now?
You write. I interviewed an actor, Andrew Garfield, on the podcast, whose mom had died of cancer several years ago, and he's probably, for a public figure, I mean, he speaks about grief very publicly in really just a beautiful way. And one of the things he said to me, which has stuck with me, which is the wound is the only route to the gift.
Yeah.
And you write a lot about the wound in the absence of the ordinary. Can you just talk a little bit about the importance of the wound? I've always felt, as a kid, I wished I had and also throughout my life, I wished I had like a scar on my face, like a Bond villain, like something like dramatic down my face, because it would telegraph to somebody without me having to say anything that I am wounded and that I have pain, but I wouldn't actually have to like spell it out, and that would be embarrassing. But like the wound would do it for me. But this idea of the wound is the route to the gift, or you said the wound brings us closer to the ground of soul. You said our wounds become the entry into the unripened seeds of our initiation.
Yeah. That was good.
It is good. Yeah. you should write something. Yeah.
No, that phrase came. I was preparing. I did a 10-week series back in 2018 called "Living a Soulful Life and Why It Matters." And the second week was on wounds because it's so important to the life of the soul. It is crucial to the life of the soul. James Hillman, one of my primary teachers, says that the soul becomes most evident through affliction. Where we suffer is where you find soul, even culturally as well as personally. So I was preparing this talk on wounds, and I was awakened at 5 a.m. with this phrase that said, your wounds are the unripened seeds of initiation. I said, wow, what does that mean? Well, if you look at your wound, because, working with initiation as much as I have over many years, you begin to see that initiation is not optional. Initiation is not optional. You can't choose whether or not you're going to go through some kind of initiatory experience. You will. Every one of us in this room has gone through critical times in their lives. And those initiations, those crisis times, are meant to break us open to something much larger. I forgot where I was going with that. What was the question? Wounds.
The wounds.
Yes. The unripened seeds of initiation. So the idea there was that that through the wound, if we can escape from the narrative about the wound and actually just trust the wound itself, it is a place of entry. It's a place where something can break open to our deeper understanding. The idea of perfectionism and specialness and having it all together, that comes out of a very immature, heroic culture. There's no room for the wound in that culture. So we all try to show the shiny face, all show our, I've got this shit together face. But underneath it, we're all weeping and we're all wounded. And if we could, again, take the narrative off the wound and see the wound, again, as an entry point where soul begins to articulate its greater imagination. There's an old phrase in ancient Greece that in your wound is your genius. Now, for me, in my wound was my shame, right? My wound only revealed my inadequacy, only revealed my imperfection, only revealed my undeservedness to be included in the circle. Well, you begin to understand after sitting with so many people that there are very few of us that aren't wounded. We're all carrying a wound. And what if we could approach the wound, again, not as a commentary on your worthiness, but on the invitation towards revelation, There's something inside the wound itself. My wound was shame. That's the wound I lived with for my entire life. And most of the time, I think I wrote about this, I can't remember or not, but going to my therapist for the first time, sitting down with Michael, and my first words to Michael were, well, I want you to help me get rid of some parts of me. Because if I could just get rid of the weakness, the inadequacy, the doubt, the insecurity, I'd be acceptable. I'd be let into the circle. And he kind of snickered a little bit and smiled and didn't say anything, which was a very good move on Michael's part. And of course, I failed miserably at that assignment. Those parts of me have become the cornerstone of my humanity. That's how I can relate to you. That's how I could begin to see that my wound of shame, when I take off the commentary, was what allowed me to hold such deep sensitivity for other people's suffering. I was given a name by this community in West Africa. The name translates, he who sets straight the bone. So that's what I've done for my entire adult life as a therapist, was helping to set straight the bone. That's what shame feels like. It's like you're just contorted and twisted, but it's not the shame, it's the commentary about the shame. It's the commentary that we have to find our way beyond.
I find the wound thing so interesting because it's only now that I have, recognized how wounded, the wound, and allowed myself to feel the pain and feel the sadness that I have so long run from. I mean, I don't know if it's ironic, but I ran from pain. I didn't want to feel pain. I didn't want to feel the sadness and the overwhelming grief. And so I ran from it. But in doing that, I robbed myself of the gift.
Yes.
And the gift is feeling my dad again, and the other people I've lost. And it's only now that I am allowing myself to feel this pain that I never understood when people said, oh, I carry this person with me, or they're in my heart. I used to think, sounds like a Hallmark card, I don't know what you're talking about, or it's just something people say. But I understand that, I feel my dad alive inside me in a way that I never did before. And the idea that you can have a relationship with somebody who has died, my relationship with my dad is closer than I know him in a way I never did as a child. Yeah. And it's incredible.
And what you're doing right now is moving from wound to medicine. If you can stay faithful to the wound and approach it with compassion, there's that quote we talked about, what you encounter, recognize, or discover depends to a large degree on the quality of your approach. When we approach with reverence, great things decide to approach us. That's John O'Donohue. So you've changed your way you're approaching the wound, right? You're now approaching it with reverence. And when we do that, great things decide to approach us. When we approach the wound with condemnation or shame or judgment, nothing moves, because that move is cold. And what alchemy teaches us is that for things to move in the psyche, they have to be kept warm. We have to approach them with kindness.
You write in the book about this, you say, when we suspend our preconceptions and static stories of who we are or who our wife or husband or partner is, when we let go of our predetermined expectations of how it all should be, then we come into a place of reverence, of deep respect, and the freshness of the encounter is once again available to us.
Right. I mean, even how you're approaching yourself has much more reverence to it now. You're not trying to rid yourself or hide from. You're turning toward it. And look at what you've done now. With all there is, with being here today, the medicine is now coming out of the wound because of the warmth of how you approached it. Until then, it will remain frozen and unmovable.
Take that in.
I get it. Yeah. I'm making notes.
Or not.
One of the things you write, which I like, which is that facing our emptiness is key to our freedom.
Yes.
Okay. Doesn't stir anything.
That's kind of what I was pointing at a few moments ago about that we.
I was thinking about myself.
Because, again, of the amnesia and because of the severing of that ancestral connection. If we go back deep enough in any of our stories, we come to an indigenous culture, right? If you go back deep enough in your story, you'll find a place that remembered what it looked like, what it felt like, what it required of the community in order to have a living culture. So as we move through Roman invasions and Christian invasions, that severance was almost total. I don't know many of us in this room that can remember the songs, the rituals, the traditions, the language even, the holy places that were there. Where did the initiations occur? We don't know this anymore. So in a sense, what we've been left with is this bereft feeling of emptiness.
Well, one thing that I've talked to you about before is this feeling of being stuck and feeling like, my basement is still filled with these boxes. There's thousands of photographs I haven't gone through. There's all this stuff, and it's lovely. But it's also deeply painful. And I feel at times, and I think a lot of people feel as they're grieving, that they're stuck in the past, and that I feel like I'm not making a progress, which I know is a word you have issues with, as much as I would like. But shouldn't I be over this by now? I'm 58. This stuff happened when I was 10.
No. That's the fiction, isn't it? Getting over it. What does that mean? Does it mean I no longer think about my dad? Does it mean
No, but I think, look, I guess what you would say is, well, it's taking it out of the hands of the child and moving it into the hands of the adult. And so I think I still struggle with that. I think I still feel very much that outrage of a child, or anger of a child, or rage and sadness. And it's a slow titration.
It is. It is. Jung said that he called these frozen pieces of psyche complexes. And in the complex, we could say the complex is a concentrated nodule of emotional material that has been severed off from consciousness and acts completely autonomously to the psyche that I'm trying to live in and be. And he said we become aware of these complexes because of interference. They intrude. Suddenly you feel that boy's grief or his fear, and suddenly you're no longer a 58-year-old man. You're a 10-year-old boy or younger, So in order for us to work with that material, we have to find ways of separating from it. And the move of separation means being able to identify how he shows up, and what emotions show up with that, what feelings, what thoughts. And the more you study that, the more you get to do that completely compassionate act of separation. But what I'm leading to is, he said, once you've gotten separation, then the real hard work begins, which is he calls discharging the complex. In other words, the complex is saturated with an emotional field, like I was saying. So there was so much grief in that field, so much fear. You've talked about how security became the issue for that boy, right? How do I survive? Because his storyline was that there's nobody here. I'm all alone. And no one's going to catch me if I fall. So don't fall, right? So all of that emotion...
I still kind of believe that.
Well, yeah. So he said that inside this nodule of consciousness is all that emotional material. And that doesn't dissolve until the adult can come in and begin to lift it off the back. As an adult, I can process the shame. I can process the fear. I can process the grief. But as a boy, no way could I digest that material. That was far too big of an emotional encounter.
So, so if this is the long dark or the beginning of the long dark or in the midst of, what does one need to get through it? What medicine does one need?
Medicine's a good word. It isn't fixing it. It isn't figuring it out. I don't think we're going to think our way through the long dark. Thinking is kind of what got us into the long dark. So it's more, again, getting that quiet sense of receptivity and listening. So what's going to get us through? Well, there's many forms of medicine. And I wrote this essay for the In the Absence of the Ordinary. I think it was the last essay I wrote, because so many people I was speaking to feel so powerless right now and kind of hopeless. They did this study in Bath University in 2022, I believe it was. They talked to 10,000 young folks from 10 different countries on their views of the future. They're not optimistic. They are pretty pessimistic. Like 65% of them said that we're in serious trouble. 54% said we're doomed, that there will be no humanity in the future. And this is our inheritance to them. Kind of this feeling of despair and hopeless. So I began thinking about, well, what is the medicine that we need to face this long dark? Well, the first thing, obvious thing, essential thing is why we're here together is we need friendship and community. All right, that's the first and utterly non-negotiable medicine that we need. The second one is imagination. Now, when I use that term, there's frequently a look of confusion, because I'm not talking about fantasizing. Let's think positively about the future. That ain't going to do it. What I mean by imagination is going back to that thought I shared a little bit earlier about becoming receptive to the dreaming earth. That I don't imagine, I am imagined. Like when I go to bed at night, I'm not thinking, well, let's see, tonight I'm going to dream about, you don't know what you're going to dream. You are dreamt. You are one of the participants in the dream, but you're not the dreamer. The soul is the dreamer. You are being dreamt. At least that's how I see it. And so the idea of imagination is I need to develop enough practices to become a really attuned receptor site for those dreams, for the imagination of the earth. We need to know how to repair our relationships to the soil, to the water, to the air. We need to understand, how do you create rituals of reconciliation right now, when so much of our attention is based on amplifying conflict? You know, we're so much right now, the rhetoric out there is so antagonistic and generating aggressions. But what is the medicine of repair? So the third thing we need, I mean, I could go on for many, many more medicines, but you all got the book now, so you get to read it. But the third medicine is remembering our deep time ancestral inheritance. In other words, what I'm saying is that in spite of the fact that we've lost that ancestral line, it's still in our deep psychic DNA. So that's why we recognize it when we're in it. When we're doing a ritual, when we're singing together, when we're sharing meals together, when we're grieving together, we are remembering that ancient cadence. And that's in us. That's in us. So if we can remember those things, what I call the trail on the ground, that the trail evolved over eons of time, but the trail was what taught us the communal practices that allowed culture to sustain, but also the individual practices. How do we shape a true human being? You know, when a culture forgets those practices, we don't have much access to becoming a true human being. And without true human beings, we can't generate living culture. Do you hear the problem? This is a beautiful symmetry that evolved over, again, hundreds of thousands of years, that healthy individuals require healthy communities and vice versa. Can't have healthy community without healthy individuals.
In the time we have left, let's talk a little bit about ritual and the purpose of it and what do you think is the importance of it?
It's the most ancient language we speak. We probably were doing ritual before we had language, verbal language.
You write in Wild Edge of Sorrow, if my memory is right, about burial rituals.
Yes.
Were occurring
Yes.
before language.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's what anthropologists and archaeologists think. We don't particularly know, but when do we first start speaking? But I don't know any functioning culture, again, those long-lived mature cultures that don't have ritual at the heart of their community. It's the means by which everything is repaired, restored, and renewed. So when there's trouble in the village, we gather to work with it. We don't ignore it or we don't make it their problem. See, when you begin thinking like a village, a ritual has a lot to do with what I call village mind. That we think like a village. We remember that what happens to me also happens to you. There's a wonderful teacher from British Columbia, Jeanette Armstrong, and she's an Okanagan elder. And she said, in our village, the word for belonging translates our one skin. Now imagine knowing that. And she said, in our community, it's the community first, family second, and individual last. And she said, you've inverted that completely in your society. Individual first, family second, and we use the language of community a lot, but it's frequently empty rhetoric. It's threadbare, it's anemic. So we have to try to remember those things and restore those.
You said we must learn how to carry grief in our lives, begin with a friend or two, and speak honesty to the heartaches you each carry. For somebody in this room right now who the grief feels very acute, what do you say?
Well, I guess a couple more things about ritual is that it doesn't have to be complicated. We would say that in some ways we're about to enter a ritual together as a collective body here in a few minutes. It can be so simple as speaking into a stone. But as long as it's witnessed, The
witnessing of it is important.
The witnessing of it is essential. That's part of the return, right?
It's the witnessing part I have problems with, I think.
Well, when that's the strategy, right? When the boy strategy is perfectionism and control, you don't want to be witnessed. You don't want to be seen. I remember thinking much of my life was designed to, when I was giving talks on shame back in the 80s, one of the things I said, the goal of the shame-bound individual was to get from birth to death without ever being seen. And that my tombstone was going to read, safe at last. What a goal, So ritual becomes that means by which we are able to enter into a space of transparency. We get to be seen. Part of the beauty of our grief ritual gatherings was that we began on Friday almost totally as strangers, right? We walked in the door, I don't know who you are, and it's very quiet on Friday night. But by the time we get to Sunday, there's this raucous feeling of village life. And it's beautiful. And it's not based on having shared my whole personal story with you. Almost none of that happens over these weekends. But what I got to see was how you are in the face of ritual and the willingness to be seen, witnessed in the depth of your own human encounter. That's what makes us known to another human being. So part of the value of ritual is that it helps us to come back into a place of really being known deeply. And again, that can be scary for folks.
You write also that it enables us to become transparent to the transcendent, as Joseph Campbell talked about.
Right. One of the values of ritual is that it does help us to feel. Ritual's pitch wasn't from human to human. Ritual's pitch was from the human to the unseen, to the invisible, to the sacred, whatever you want to call that other that's out there that we can feel and sense. So ritual was not between humans. It was designed to break us open to that kind of intimacy with something much larger than our own human capacities.
You also talked about it suturing the tears in the soul that occur in the daily rounds of living and inviting the denied and forgotten aspects of psyche to show up, the abandoned parts of who we are.
Oh, that's such a huge piece. So in the Wild Edge of Sorrow, thank you. The Wild Edge of Sorrow, I wrote about the 5 gates of grief. Some of you might have read that. Okay, one person. It's good to know I have fans. 2, all right, 3, 4. All right. The second gate of grief has to do with the parts of us that have never known love, right? The pieces of us that we had to exile, that we had to push away because they didn't fit in with school, with family, with church or synagogue or anything. So we were told that these were unwelcomed parts of us. And so because belonging is much more important than integrity at that point, we will cleave off huge portions of our being, to the point where we basically don't know how to move through life because so much of us has been excised from life. So a lot of what happens in therapy is basically a second gate ritual. How do I begin to reconcile with the parts of me that I have banished? How do I make myself hospitable? How do I begin to repair the shame and the judgment that I carry for these parts of me so that they might come home again? That's really what that ritual is about, called therapy. But it's really about the return of what's been exiled. Yeah.
Do you still feel grief?
Never.
I mean, or I get a dumb question, but I mean, I guess how has it changed in your own life?
I'm much more welcoming of it. My brother-in-law died 2 weeks ago, and so I'm still feeling the tender absence of his presence in my world. My oldest brother died 6 months ago, and I'm just watching this gathering momentum of family deaths. I'm the youngest of 8 kids, and they're all in their mid to late 80s now, and they're not well. And so I either have to shut down or I have to say, this is what I will be digesting now.
I can give you shutdown advice if you want. I haven't written a book about it yet, but I'm taking a different tack.
I think there's a lot of intelligence in that, yes.
Do you ever struggle? I mean, everybody, grief is not talked about. People don't know what to say. Even people who have experienced it sometimes. I mean, I sometimes struggle with what to say. What do you say if somebody you don't know comes up to you, tells you about a loss they've had? What do you do?
I get those every day.
Yeah.
Many every day. People with, as you say, with those phone calls that came into you. Mm. I mean, there's just so much grief out there. I often just say, I really get how difficult this is to carry. I just hope you find enough arms and hearts to help you carry it. Mm. That, again, the amount of pressure we feel to somehow lift this weight in solitary confinement is so crushing. And the hospitality that we have to grief is just atrocious. So all I'm trying to do is make us more welcoming and kind and compassionate towards those difficult guests.
I've noticed, now that I've started feeling,
Careful.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. I don't want to oversell it.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to me at times. I've started to notice also people's interactions around grief, and oftentimes I've noticed people will sort of probe the person who's just said, "Oh, I lost my mom." They'll probe with questions like, "How old were they? How close were you?" And I sort of start to think, is this a probe for them to feel better about themselves? Of, oh, okay, well, it was a elderly person. Oh, they weren't very close. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I don't have to feel so bad that they have had this loss. Maybe I'm being...
No. I think we often approach it with management skills in mind. How do I control? How do I manage? How do I minimize the exposure?
I've also noticed rarely, if somebody says to you, I mean, often people come up to me now all the time, often they will say, I lost my son or I've lost my father, very rarely do people say the person's name unless you ask.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is. I find it interesting. I don't know if it's the pain of saying somebody's name. I don't know if it's a fear that saying that is too much for the non-griever to hear. I usually now try to ask the person, what was their name?
Yeah.
And there's usually a little bit of startlement that I'm asking. There's usually like, what? And then I usually have to repeat it. And but it's nice. I mean, I like knowing people's names.
No.
But I don't know, just something I've noticed.
Well, it deepens the intimacy of that moment. It suddenly becomes a threesome. It's not just you and that person, it's also the one who's gone. It's like you say, you now can speak and your father's here. You feel him more present. So when we say the name, we're actually also invoking their presence, right?
I had the most incredible thing occur. I had never heard my dad's voice since he died because we didn't have any recordings. So he was in the hospital. He suggested we get a tape recorder to like interview him. But by the time we got it, he had died. So I didn't have a recording until about 8 years ago. He had written a book in 1976 called Families, and he had done some like public radio interviews about it. And somebody had restored some radio on public radio in New York, and they sent me a recording of his voice. And I clicked on it, and suddenly my office filled with his voice. And just about a month ago, I got an email from somebody at Mississippi Public Television who said, hey, I'm an archivist, and I came across an old TV interview your dad gave. I have not seen my dad moving since he died. I have no video of him. I have no moving film images. And they sent it to me, and suddenly I have 20 minutes of my dad sitting there answering questions. It's incredible. Annoyingly, he had a Southern accent, and he had worked as an actor for a while, so he'd actually developed a mid-Atlantic accent when he spoke publicly. So it wasn't really the way he normally talked. So it was a little bit like listening to an actor playing my father, but it's good enough, though. I'm happy to have it.
I'm glad you have it. Yeah.
Is there anything you want to leave people with before?
Well, we're going to have another chance to talk at the end.
Yeah, that's true.
So
Okay.
Let's pause. Take a breath together.
Well, that was a loud friggin' breath. I've never heard a room breathe. That was the first time in my life. That was cool. Yeah, wow. Is that like a Commonweal thing? That's incredible.
We encourage people to breathe. Yeah. It's,
I mean, you hear about a room breathing, but that's a room breathing. Jeez. I gotta try that.
you're learning a lot today,
Yeah,
aren't you?
my mind is blown. A room breathe? What?
All right. So what we're going to do now is move into ritual together. All right? This is all invitational.
I gotta go for just a second.
Nice try.
Very important call.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is there are 5 stations around the room. There's one in this little side room over here. There's one back here. There's a bowl of water, and there are baskets or bags of stones. The invitation is very simple. I encourage you to rise and walk, maybe meander different stations, pick up a stone and speak a single sorrow into that stone. Just speak a grief you're carrying at this moment, okay? Then put the stone in the water and just notice what happens for you. But the main thing I want you to notice is all the other stones coming into the bowl. Today's ritual isn't so much about depth as it is about breadth. I want you to leave here feeling in your body, I was part of a 1,000-person grief ritual today. That 1,000 of us spoke our sorrows into a stone. I truly believe that no grief is private, that no grief is, in a sense, just mine. It belongs to all of us. When we open our grief ritual weekends, we start with having people share after all the singing, right? Singing first. And then we have them share a single thread of grief that's come in the door with them. And so and most people have a basket full of grief, right, that they're coming in. So they'll share one thread, well, our child died, or my brother died by suicide, or whatever the thread is. After it's over, I'll say, okay, now you may not have had that particular grief, but was there any grief shared you couldn't relate to? And of course not, because we've entered the commons of the soul. Again, the commons is loss. So that shared space is what we all feel together. So again, today, the idea here isn't so much that we're trying to resolve a grief or fix a grief, but to have it witnessed and to share it. So I'll say to the group at that point, in communal mind, in village mind, let's imagine that these are our sorrows. These belong to all of us. Because some of you here today, both in this room and when we're in those rooms, may not grieve today. It's hard to grieve on demand. Okay, it's 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. Come on, do it. And some people are so prompt and ready to go, they'll just fall to their knees immediately, but others won't. Like I said, it took me 3 grief rituals before I shed a tear. So for those who didn't shed a tear that day, they helped others shed a tear. They helped hold the space. They were the ones who welcomed them back to the village and said, thank you for your tears. Thank you for helping us empty our communal cup. So the idea here is, again, that we're sharing these sorrows. That's the intention of this little simple ritual we're going to do, okay? It's just that we begin to feel into the collective shared fact that most likely you're here because you carry grief. You're here because the thread that Anderson and I have been following now for a long time is touching you. So I want to invite you to be willing to touch your own grief just lightly today and speak a sorrow or 2 or 3. And once we start the ritual, we'll go for an hour or until all the stones are gone. There are over 600 stones in the room. That should be enough for each of you. But don't be shy. Come up as often as you want. Shed some grief and listen to the others. And those of you who are listening online, we're going to be drumming over here softly during the ritual. Just feel your own grief and name your own sorrows as you drop your own stone into the bowl. Because this is ours. And it requires all of us to lift it and hold it. Okay? This is what we walk around with every day. And for most of us, we have no place to speak it. We're just asked to carry it silently, stoically, heroically. But what happens when we do it that way is that we never develop faith in grief. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's actually a posture of lack of faith. But I don't trust what will happen if I go there. As I wrote about, so many times people will say, if I go there, I'm never coming back. And what I've ended up saying to most of those is that if you don't go there, you're never coming back. Because so much of our psychic life force is caught and locked up in those places of avoidance and resistance and determining that we will never feel those things. But that costs us dearly, as we've been talking about, right? It costs. That strategy is very, very costly to our sense of being in this world, being alive. So I just want us to feel that one of the things we're trying to do is gradually increase our capacity to trust that where grief is taking us is a soul place, not a term of imprisonment. Grief does not want to take you hostage. It wants to be honored. Because to honor grief is to say that I dared to love, that love touched me. There are places in me that have not known love. The world is suffering. We have forgotten so much, and I'm carrying the ancestors as well. Now, if we can have a little bit of faith in that, good things can happen. Where are you? How are you doing?
I'm good. I think this is extraordinary. It's to hear everybody, to hear the names of your loved ones, it's incredibly powerful. Listening to the voicemail messages that I listen to all the time, just learning other people's names and their losses. And, I think the loneliness of grief is one of the most difficult things about it. And yet it does not certainly feel like that today in this room right now. That's beautiful. There's a woman named Mary Lykainen who is a listener of my podcast, and she left me a voicemail that was really extraordinary. Her son Ian died of glioblastoma, so I just wanted to say his name today. Ian. There was something I actually wanted to read. I actually read this on the air when Pope Francis died, and it's something Pope Francis said. It was the speech that he gave to an empty St. Peter's Square during COVID. And I had never heard it before. I don't listen to Vatican radio a lot, so but I was doing research when he died, and I was on the air, and I think I was in Rome or London or something, and I came across this, and I just thought it was lovely. So I thought I'd just read it. It's 2 minutes long, so if you bear with me. This is during COVID, he said this. The storm exposes our vulnerability and uncovers those false and superfluous certainties around which we've constructed our daily schedules, our projects, our habits, and priorities. It shows us how we have allowed to become dull and feeble the very things that nourish, sustain, and strengthen our lives and our communities. The tempest lays bare all our prepackaged ideas and forgetfulness of what nourishes our people's souls. All those attempts that anesthetize us with ways of thinking and acting that supposedly save us, but instead prove incapable of putting us in touch with our roots and keeping alive the memory of those who have gone before us. We deprive ourselves of the antibodies we need to confront adversity. In this storm, the facade of those stereotypes with which we camouflaged our egos, always worrying about our image, has fallen away, uncovering once more that blessed common belonging of which we cannot be deprived, our belonging as brothers and sisters. We've gone ahead at breakneck speed, feeling powerful, unable to do anything. Greedy for profit, we let ourselves get caught up in things and lured away by haste. We did not stop at your reproach to us. We were not shaken awake by wars or injustice across the world, nor did we listen to the cry of the poor or of our ailing planet. We carried on regardless, thinking we would stay healthy in a world that was sick. Now that we are in a stormy sea, we implore you, wake up, Lord. You are calling on us, you are calling on us to seize this time of trial as a time of choosing. It is not the time of your judgment, but of our judgment, a time to choose what matters and what passes away, a time to separate what is necessary from what is not. It is a time to get our lives back on track with regard to you, Lord, and to others. We can look to so many exemplary companions for the journey who, even though fearful, have reacted by giving their lives. This is the force of the Spirit poured out and fashioned in courageous and generous self-denial. It is the life in the Spirit that can redeem value and demonstrate how our lives are woven together and sustained by ordinary people, often forgotten people, who do not appear in newspaper and magazine headlines, nor in the grand catwalks of the latest show, but who, without a doubt, are in these very days writing the decisive events of our time. Doctors, nurses, supermarket employees, cleaners, caregivers, providers of transport, law and order forces, volunteers, priests, religious men and women, and so very many others who understand that no one reaches salvation by themselves. In the face of so much suffering, where the authentic development of our peoples is assessed, we experience the priestly prayer of Jesus that they may all be one. How many people every day are exercising patience and offering hope, taking care to sow not panic, but a shared responsibility? How many fathers, mothers, grandparents, and teachers are showing our children in small, everyday gestures how to face up to and navigate a crisis by adjusting their routines, lifting their gaze, and fostering prayer? How many are praying, offering, and interceding for the good of all? Prayer and quiet service, these are our victorious weapons.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm feeling full. A really good meal. Yeah. Any place we want to revisit or touch into? Or?
I mean, I often feel, I talked about feeling stuck and stuff, but I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to say.
Well, it's an important word, right? Being stuck. We have this fixation of constant progress. Always, always, always moving forward. And people oftentimes would come into my practice and they would almost confess, they would apologize. I think I regressed this week. And I would say, wonderful. I wonder where soul is taking you today. The fiction of progress is not in accord with soul. Soul does not move in a straight line. Soul meanders and wanders more like a stream bed than an arrow. And sometimes stuckness is one of those messages from soul saying, no, you cannot move forward. This is the place. This is where you have to dig. So in the fiction of progress, stuckness feels like something's wrong. But from soul's perspective, this means this is the spot. Dig here. And don't try to get beyond this place too soon, too fast.
I think there's a big part of me that worries about forgetting that by, I don't know, making progress. I know that's not the right term, but by evolving, by moving, grief from the child's hands to the adult's hands, to get to a place where, I feel like it's like forgetting them.
You're afraid that you're going to forget them if you move on from that. I've never seen that happen. All I have seen is that when we move with warmth towards the grief, as you, I think, said even earlier today, your dad has become more present, right?
Yeah.
More available. Because that distance that you've created between us and the source of that sorrow has been diminishing. Mm-hmm. So the space is now warm rather than cold. It's inviting rather than rejecting.
It's one of the things that's, to me, I don't know how many of you are going through boxes of things, but or have, but it's one of the things that my mom saved everything. And so I said about, okay, I'm really going to make progress today on a box. And I open up the box, and it's Christmas cards from 1968 that she received. And I feel like I have to read every one because some of them turn out to be like, oh, Marilyn Monroe sent my mom a Christmas card. That's kind of cool. Or like, I discovered telegrams. I know. Marilyn was always sending cards. I literally opened a box and it was telegrams, a stack of telegrams, and they were all from Frank Sinatra for the 2 weeks my mom was hooking up with Frank Sinatra. I kid you not. And they were exactly what you would want telegrams from Frank Sinatra to be. They're like, hey, babe, coming into town, ring-a-ding-ding. Literally signed, your fella on the white horse. I kid you not. Call me, Crestview, 943. I think you have more than I should. I mean, like, so some of them are amazing, things like that. And obviously, I'm not going to throw those out. But then, you know, some of them are just random Christmas cards from people who probably didn't even matter to her at the time. But I feel like each one is infused with, like, a little piece of her or something, or a piece of my dad or my brother. And it's, yeah, it's very complicated to, like, what do you keep? What do you throw out? How do you make these decisions? And I don't have an answer, which is why these friggin' boxes are still in my basement. And I'm still doing a podcast because I can't figure it out.
Yeah, I don't know if there's an answer to that question. But I think one thing we talked about was approach it like a ritual. Yeah. Mm. This isn't a duty or an obligation or a forensic mission. It's actually a sacred encounter with the lineage of your mother. So to approach it as a ritual, maybe even invite her to join you. Invite your dad to join you. Invite your brother to join you and say, tonight we're going to sit and read and review and cry.
I find it so strange, I mean, so hard, you know, you were speaking about all those who died during, you know, the 1981 through 1994, before the, you know, the cocktail came out. And, you know, an entire generation was wiped out. And I follow this thing, the AIDS Memorial on Instagram, which I think is the only meaningful thing I find on Instagram. And it's people posting about their friends and lovers and others who died. And I remember one in particular, this person wrote, they were here and they mattered. And it's a very strange thing, I think, to have, I mean, I was a kid during that time and only watching it tangentially from afar, and I knew some adults who had died, friends of my parents, but to think of all those people who were here, and there was a me version here, and there was a you version before, and they're just gone, and they're not, other than in the memories of those who knew them, society just moves on and just rolls on. And I think there's a great, I don't know, I find it terribly sad.
It is. We don't know how to honor those stories because they do matter.
Yeah.
And our obsession with moving on creates this massive...
It's the same with you see veterans from World War II or the Korean War, Vietnam, who are gathering together, and, you know, people don't remember what they went through, or remember what they went through, and they remember. And just as those who went through, you know, the Holocaust of AIDS remember, but it's very painful, I think, for any group that experienced something, soldiers, Marines, anybody in war, and then society just doesn't have time for that any longer. Yeah. That's not how we operate.
Not how we operate. In that heroic model, there is no room for that. So again, your being here again is part of the evidence of a deeper calling within our collective body to practice remembering and not just moving on. There's something so important about remembrance. We even call it Remembrance Day, you know, just to try to not turn it into a sales day. You know, it's Memorial Day sales. We don't know how to honor the absolute truth of what's in the side of those losses. And that's, again, part of what we're here to do. Try to remember, make space, do the rituals, remember. Yeah.
That's all I got.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
This has been really extraordinary. I just want to leave with just a
couple thoughts about don't make this a one-off. Practice this. Keep it moving. Because everyone you see on the street, everyone you see at the grocery store, everyone you meet at the barber shop is carrying this. And maybe you just make a soft gesture or see them in their eyes, that sadness that we're talking about today. And with your friends and your families, make space for these words, this sharing, this vulnerability. It's what heals. It's what heals.
I also find that, doing this little podcast I've done, and I'm going to now start doing it like twice a month as opposed to only 8 a year, and we're actually going to start a weekly show about grief. These are the most important discussions I have. The times I'm stopped on the street and end up engaging with people on this, I would rather have these conversations all day long than many of the conversations I, engage in other realms, because they're just the most important, the most real. They have just incredible meaning, yes, and it's just such an extraordinary thing. And I'm so grateful to be here, but also to have discovered that this is something that we all go through, and there is such a strength and a feeling of, not being alone any longer. Right. is a lovely, lovely feeling.
You are not alone, Anderson. Yeah. I would encourage you, before you leave today, to come up and look at these bowls. This is amazing, that every one of these stones is a story of sorrow. And these are our stories. These are our tears. The water will be taken out after you all leave and given to the green world. The stones will be taken to a very special site so they have a way of getting back to the water, so that the ocean itself will take our stories of sorrow and turn them into crab thought, into dolphin song and kelp beds and...
Crab thought?
Crab thought.
I like that. I always knew those crabs were deep thinkers.
Well, now you know why.
Yeah.
So I'll end with a poem that I often end with our grief rituals, and it's a short little quatrain from Rumi. He said, "Those tender words we shared with one another are stored in the secret heart of heaven. One day, like rain, they will fall and spread, and our mystery will grow green across the earth." May that be so. Thank you all. Thank you.
Don't take it, don't, don't. 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 Don't take it, don't.